Hello everyone, my name is Deltlead and welcome back to another video on how to build rockets. Today we're going to be covering the all-important topic of designing engines for your rockets. Now, in a sense, the rocket engine is the core of the rocket, and everything else is just the fuel and the guidance systems to point that engine to where it needs to. So obviously it's a very important part of the design process. Now, you might want to ask, what's the best rocket engine in the game? But the truth is there really isn't one rocket engine that we can point to and say it's the best. There are rocket engines that are better than others at doing certain things, but each has its pros and cons, and that can make deciding which one to use for a certain application complicated. So hopefully this video will help to make that decision much simpler for you. The first thing you should know is that because of SR2's procedural rocket engine system, there are nearly infinite configurations that you can have an engine in. This gives you as a player a ton of freedom to fine-tune an engine to meet your exact needs, and every situation is different, so what I say in this video may not exactly fit the situation you're dealing with. That being said, most rocket engines are used in one of a few general situations: booster engines, main vacuum engines, maneuvering thrusters, and landing engines. Let's start by taking a look at booster engines. The term booster rocket or booster engine is either the first stage of a multi-stage rocket or a short-burning rocket that burns in parallel with your more efficient main engines. Booster engines give your rocket the thrust it needs to overcome Drew's high gravity of 9.8 meters per second squared. Your booster engine should have a reasonably high starting thrust to weight ratio, usually around 1.5 to 3. A TWR of 1 means your rocket engine is generating just enough thrust to cancel out the acceleration of gravity, but not enough thrust to lift the rocket off the ground. A TWR of less than 1 means your rocket does not have sufficient thrust to launch, and a very low thrust-to-weight ratio of around 1.1 means your rocket will accelerate very slowly and waste a lot of fuel fighting gravity to get off the launch pad. The nozzles on your booster stage rockets should also be optimized for atmospheric flight. This means reducing the ratio between the nozzle throat and the nozzle length. If the nozzle length is way larger than the throat size, your rocket exhaust will overexpand at the bell and form shock diamonds as it leaves the nozzle. While these shock diamonds are pretty to look at, they mean that the exhaust pressure is lower than atmospheric pressure and the exhaust is being squeezed by the air. If the nozzle length is too small, then the exhaust pressure will be greater than the atmospheric pressure and the exhaust will overexpand, creating a wide plume behind your rocket. A perfectly optimized booster engine will have a perfectly straight exhaust plume, meaning the velocity of your fuel is all going straight backwards and none is being lost going sideways. One challenge with optimizing your nozzle is that as your rocket climbs, the atmospheric pressure you're operating in drops. If you make an engine that's optimized for sea level, then you'll have lost most of that efficiency at about 10 kilometers. So when optimizing an engine, you should pick a point between sea level and vacuum so to get the best possible efficiency at a range of altitudes. I usually set my altitude slider in the performance analyzer to around 15 kilometers, and then I adjust my nozzle length until I find a maximum thrust and efficiency. Some engine types that make good booster rockets include the gas generator 1 and gas generator 2 fuel cycles, the staged fuel cycle engine, and the full flow cycle engine. These engines provide a solid amount of thrust, which is key for booster engines. Main vacuum engines are probably the most important engine to get right in the game, as they are the ones that burn the longest and do most of the work during any mission. They are used for anything from making major orbital changes to making escape burns and capture burns around other planets. These engines don't need as high of a thrust-to-weight ratio since you're already in orbit and not burning directly against the force of gravity, so you can sacrifice thrust for efficiency with these rockets. Be careful though, for interplanetary missions with long burns you need a rocket engine that has enough thrust to make a burn in a reasonable amount of time, or you may find that you have to start burning while you're still on the wrong side of the planet in your orbit. Optimizing your rocket nozzles for vacuum performance is probably the easiest. Since the main vacuum engines will only be operating in a vacuum, optimizing their nozzles is simple. Set the nozzle length to 200%, then set your nozzle throat diameter to as low as possible while still having enough thrust to complete whatever burn you need to in enough time. Picking the right type of nozzle here is important, and you should take a look at the thrust and delta V that each of the different nozzles give you. Generally speaking though, the bell nozzle is the most efficient in vacuum settings, so you should probably go with that one. Some engine types that are good for main vacuum engines include gas generator 1, but not gas generator 2 fuel cycle engines, staged fuel cycle engines, full flow fuel cycle engines, and electric engines for smaller spacecraft. Gas generator 2 engines are too high thrust and low efficiency to be effective as vacuum engines. If you're using a staged or a full flow fuel cycle, you should be careful though, as these engine types take longer to go from 0% to 100% throttle, which makes precise changes in velocity very tricky. If your rocket does use these full flow fuel cycle engines, you should consider including maneuvering engines into your design. Maneuvering engines are very small, very low thrust engines that have a very quick throttle response. These fast throttle responses make them easy to use for precise maneuvers, like rendezvous or interplanetary intercepts. Giving them a very low thrust means you can make small corrections without overshooting, and a quick throttle response allows you to cut off your rocket right when you need to. Engine types that make good maneuvering thrusters are pressure-fed or electric engines, but personally I think pressure-fed engines reign supreme here, as they're the smallest and lightest rockets in the game, meaning you don't lose payload capacity by including them in a design. RCS engines can also be used as maneuvering engines, but can't be used by autoburns and require their own fuel tanks. Now, landing engines require aspects from each of the other engines, and finding the balance between them can be tricky. They have to have enough thrust to fight against the force of gravity, they need to be very efficient as you will likely be using the same engine to get back into orbit, and they need to have a quick throttle response for those final seconds before touchdown when you're adjusting your final velocity. The first thing to consider when building your landing engines is what planet are you trying to land on. The Performance Analyzer allows you to compare your engine performance between different planets pretty easily. If you want to land on a planet with an atmosphere, you need to consider optimizing your engines for atmospheric conditions, as well as making sure you'll have at least enough thrust at sea level to hover. Find the planet you want to land on in the Performance Analyzer and pay close attention to numbers like the thrust-to-weight ratio of your engines and the difference between the thrust of your engines in a vacuum and the thrust at sea level. Landings are probably the most difficult part of the game, and picking the right engine to help with your descent is crucial to success here. If you're going for an atmospheric landing, try using a larger engine with a short nozzle. A shrunk-down gas generator engine will do well here. If you're putting a spacecraft on one of the smaller celestial bodies, something like a tiny pressure-fed engine is probably enough for a landing engine. If you want to land on planets like Drew or Sergea with thick atmosphere and strong gravities, you'll need something with a lot more oomph to slow you down. Now that you have built the perfect engine for each stage of your mission, go back through the stages and make sure that you have enough fuel for everything you're trying to accomplish. Check your delta V totals and see if there is a way to optimize your design to give you the most fuel to work with possible. Ultimately, the type of engines you want to put on your rocket depend on what you want to accomplish. Don't be afraid to experiment. Oftentimes, some good old-fashioned trial and error is the best way to discover the best engines for the job. Being creative and finding new solutions to problems is the whole point of SimpleRockets 2, and sometimes that means tackling really difficult challenges. Don't be discouraged if your rockets keep crashing or you can't make it into orbit. It takes time and practice to get good at these things. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you found this video helpful. Please like and subscribe to the channel so I can continue to make more tutorial videos like this one. If you have any recommendations for videos, leave a comment below. I love hearing feedback from you guys and do my best to make content that you guys want to watch. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see all of you in the next video. Bye-bye.